Amit Ray once said, bringing countries together above their conflicts requires great mind and great hearts. Keep this in mind as we discuss today the ongoing visit of Chinese President Xi to Saudi Arabia and what does it mean for the global geopolitical landscape moving forward. My name is Dr. David Waralou.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday. And what was on the agenda? To break the long-time U.S. dominance in the region.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in Saudi Arabia. He's there for 3 days of meetings with regional leaders focused on energy.
On a, quote, pioneering trip to open a new era of China's relations with the Arab world.
The world is random, meaningless, chaos. Or is it? How do some of the best, wealthiest, and most powerful people seem to know what's coming before it happens? Well, one way is that they create the circumstances in their favor, but the other is that they know how to read the world's stage and spot patterns and trends in key areas. They don't get lost in the overwhelm of endless information. They know what's important to pay attention to using their own formulas, and most importantly, they know where to put that information to actually make it usable. Would you like to be able to do the same thing? Well, we have a course that teaches you to do that exact same thing. It's called No Nonsense Politics. So if you want the leg up that some of the world's brightest have, as well as an online community of people who think for themselves just like you, check it out. Link in the description box below.
No matter how much time passes, the geopolitical events just keep getting more and more interesting and intense.
Indeed, Ross, that's also a reflection of this changing geopolitical landscape that is going in a direction many have not anticipated.
For sure.
Yeah, it was a question towards the end of the last century, believe it or not. What will the 21st century look like, geopolitically speaking? There are those who touched about the economy, about the finances, and so forth. But geopolitically speaking, you will always look at the Middle East as always the hub. Because the Middle East, that's where really things centers around the Middle East for one reason. And
oil and energy.
Yeah,
boy, is that the case.
Access to energy.
That's it.
That explains our presence there for, almost 70 years or so? Way back. So.
Well, what we know is that Saudi Arabia helped the United States win World War II.
If it weren't for access to oil, the outcome would have been different. I'm sure you're aware of the historical facts regarding how World War II ended. You know, Japan because Japan lacked access to energy. This is where the deal was made, and I believe, what is it, Malta or Yalta?
I don't.
Yeah, when the Truman administration at the time met with, or Eisenhower that is, it was about the access with the Saudis. That access to the energy paved the way for the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia, even though it was before. It started back in the 30s of the last century. So.
You know, it's not like the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States has been a nice, smooth sail.
No.
It has been up and down, rocky. A lot of things have gone on.
Exactly. Well, this is why in this video we decided to get on this and do it right away to provide you a brief analysis as to what it all means that now President Xi physically went to Saudi Arabia. He's still there, of course. By the time you watch this video, he probably would have returned back to China. But what was interesting that it was President Xi's third physical visit after this pandemic, the craziness of
that tells you how significant this was, that Xi would actually leave China to come to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you got a chance to see the reception he received.
Oh, was it impressive.
Yeah.
Even they gave him an honorary doctorate from the Saudi University.
Wow.
I mean, this was a big deal, I was going to say, compared to how President Biden was received.
Yeah. Now, how does it mean for psychological impact, in your opinion?
To which countries?
Yeah.
Well, what we're seeing is the world is watching this closely. The United States seems to be in a path of losing esteem and power worldwide. And if the American people are paying attention to this, this should be of great concern, because it's going to impact how we as Americans live our lives.
Exactly. Well, I can see we're not going to be talking about the details of how the visit is and all that. That's all good and all that. We're here to provide you an brief in-depth analysis as to what does it mean, what does this trip means for the future of not only the global geopolitical landscape and economic and financial, but also Saudi-China relations.
Well, we know that that Saudi was facing this way,
and now
they're facing that way.
And I remember I write a book about the Saudis in which I talked mainly about, I devoted a section to the Saudi-China relations.
Yeah, let me read from your book.
Sure.
With this in mind, Saudi Arabia considers two main points. First, China's increased presence in the Middle East will significantly shape the region's political and economic landscape. Of course it will.
Indeed.
Second, China and Iran's rapprochement could and would hinder the KSA's ability to influence, as it once did, the regional affairs of the Middle East.
Yeah, that was from the book that I wrote about Saudi Arabia a few years ago. Well, that's the way I see it, Ross. The visit by President Xi to Xi, how do you pronounce it?
Xi.
Xi. Okay, to make sure.
I've heard him say it, and so
Yeah, so.
that's how he pronounces it.
Well, you know how to pronounce the Chinese character. I don't. But the way I look at it is the idea of how this is a reflection now of that changing global order.
Absolutely.
Because that's the way I look at it. It is my belief, and this is my personal opinion, it is my belief that the Saudis do not want to be left behind. So they are realizing that the United States is shifting its attention from the Middle East into Asia, mainly China.
Yes.
And we're going to do a video about the US defense budget and what it means. And this is why I believe the Saudis realizing if this shift from the US towards Asia, that means also from an economic perspective, that the Saudis do not want to be left behind, given how China is one of the top oil importers from the kingdom.
When President Biden was running for office, he denounced Saudi Arabia for the murder of somebody.
Of Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist,
Right.
the Washington Post.
And essentially said, we'll settle with those evildoers. Well, how do you think that landed when in the kingdom of Saudi Arabia?
They didn't like that.
And I think that they really resented it deeply. And when Biden was there to beg for oil, not only was he in a weak position, but it also made these ridiculous pronouncements about how he's going to level up and make justice occur in Saudi Arabia. How ridiculous can this be?
And this is why I believe the Saudis also thinking in terms of the shift into the financial sector. What do I mean by this? Because it's very important. Because Saudi Arabia wants to join BRICS.
Yes.
Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa. And if you know anything about this, you know that those countries are amassing gold. It's because the Saudis usually use the petrodollar.
Yep.
And to me personally, and this is my personal opinion, it's an indication of that the Saudis are going to get rid of the petrodollar and use something else.
Like much of the rest of the world.
Well, mainly in the global south. Those are mainly. But let me just make one thing clear here. When I say they're going to get rid of the petrodollar, that's only within the oil transactions. The Saudis will still maintain the US dollar in other aspects, like, for example, when they purchase US weapons. How do they pay for it? By the dollar. That doesn't mean it's going to go, but an indication is going into that direction. That's what I see this.
And they certainly have enough US dollars.
Exactly.
Well,
because the Saudis, I was lucky to see the amount of gold, how much gold the Saudis have in the United States. I saw it with my own eyes.
Wow.
It was massive. So here's the other thing that we need to take into consideration, just for you to understand, is that with this visit, Xi went with his delegation also. They signed some deals.
A lot of them.
Yeah, the ones that I'm familiar with, the agreement they reached, about $30 billion. But that's not where the interest is in this. The interest in that Saudis now agreed that they will allow Huawei to build the technological infrastructure in the kingdom, the cloud. So you can just see what it means, and also because they both, Saudi Arabia and China, want to cement the relationship regarding energy.
Well, it certainly seems that they're doing it.
I think so.
I think they've just done it.
Yeah, and they're moving forward with this one. And this also explains, Ross, why President Xi attended the summit of the GCC. It's called the Gulf Cooperation Council. The GCC, those are countries in the Gulf.
Yeah.
And if they all share one thing in common is energy. They have a lot
And are they loaded with it?
Yeah, they have a lot of oil and all that. But also because they understand when it comes down to China regarding infrastructure, Chinese tends to be good at this.
You aren't kidding.
Let's just face it. They can build the stuff, the infrastructure that they needed. Well, the Saudi Arabia is more interested in this because of what the Crown Prince in BS, his interest in building the future city of Neom.
The price tag that they put on that is $500 billion.
Yeah.
And they want the Chinese help in putting that thing together.
Yeah, I don't know whether he's succeed or not, because given the rift that exists between the MBS and the CIA. And if you become an enemy of the CIA, you all know what I mean, right? So, because it was never a good relationship there, the Central, as someone who worked in Washington and I understand this kind of dynamics, the Central Intelligence Agency has always a good relationship with Prince Naif, the one who was removed from the line of succession. So, in the US, they don't favor this young guy. And because but when he takes over after the passing of his father, King Salman, you'll be looking at this current prince becoming a king for the next 5 or 6 or even 7 decades.
It spells a bad relationship between the United States and the Saudis.
Exactly. But at this point, what the Saudis looking for is looking to make a statement on the global stage. That's the way I look at it. Because there is another factor we have to consider. And the other factor is this, is that China has also a close relationship to Iran. And if you know anything about the history, this is why when I wrote this book, I detailed as far as the tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, because that dated back thousands of years, way back. That's why we didn't understand the Middle East, how it operates.
We've spent decades looking at history and how people don't forgive these past sins.
No, they won't.
They carry them generationally into, you're guilty because you're them. Hold it, I wasn't alive when all that happened. It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
You're accountable for the sins of your grandfather.
Yeah, absolutely correct. So, now, there is another aspect that some analysts have argued that President Xi wants to improve his global profile, his image. Of course, there is that debate in the West as to China's going to take over the world. So, something I don't subscribe to, that notion is. But there is some questions that have emerged recently as to, for example, with what's going on in China regarding the zero COVID policy.
Oh, yeah.
Which, by the way, the government is backing, Chinese government that is backing down after the massive protest that's been taken in China. So, could this explain, and again, those are my personal opinions here, could this explain the concern that she had about the domestic uprising against his rule? Possibly, possibly not. So, and I am in a process of looking into the structure of the Politburo, the individuals there, because I need to look at for some specific information, and I have my own contacts, as you know, and we'll talk about this at some point. But in any event, that's what President Xi, by visiting a country like Saudi Arabia, it raised his global profile.
You look historically at China, and we certainly have done that, and they don't have this expansionist policy of going out and conquering the world. They just don't have it in their history, and they seem to not have it as any desirable thing that they want.
Yeah.
Now, the Belt and Road Initiative is going after resources and business. That is not owning territory.
That's true. And this is where, when you think about this visit, you have to think about it in terms of not only the strengthening ties between China and Saudi Arabia, but also you have to think about it in terms of how Saudi Arabia and China, we both can contribute to the shifting of the geopolitical order. Because you look at it, and I've talked about this before in previous video, it's not if, but when Saudi Arabia joined BRICS, who's in the BRICS? Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa. Well, Russia, what do they have? What does Saudi Arabia and Russia have in common?
Energy.
Yeah, top oil producers. But within BRICS also, you have China and India. What do they share in common? Large global markets. So you can just see. So for Saudi Arabia joining the BRICS, it will make perfect sense economically speaking, but it will also have an impact on the global financial system.
It's inevitable because of how things are rolling out. You know, we look at trends and patterns. Well, what are we looking at?
Yeah.
Here's the pattern.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we talk about in our course, how to identify those patterns.
Yes.
How to spot them, because spotting the patterns and understand them will allow you to understand, like in this case, the visit of President Xi gives you an indication as to what lies ahead, not only regarding the Saudi-Chinese relations, but also the global geopolitical order. That's the way I see it. So there is the other aspect that we need to consider, where Saudi Arabia is going to be investing economically. You know, this is where that shift comes in. The Saudis probably at a crossroads right now in thinking in terms of, do we invest in the West or do we invest in the East?
What an important consideration.
Yeah.
We know that they have major lobbying interests in the United States and have a heavy impact on what our Congress does. We also know that they're the ones that built the refineries, correct?
They built ones in China, brand new. But when they were asked to update the one in the United States, they turned it down.
I think that's part of the trend and the pattern. Oh, I wonder.
Exactly. It's because the United States depends on Saudi oil. That's the whole relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States is built on energy for security. So Saudis falls under the U.S. umbrella.
I wonder if it would be a false conclusion that the Saudis are considering sending a whole lot of their petroleum to other places, and they're not going to update anything in the United States because they see a declining market. I don't know if that's true or not. It sort of fits the pattern, though.
Well, it fits the pattern because it's aligned with where the Saudis wants to be.
Yeah.
You think about it like, you think about these geopolitical trends. It's like a train. Do the Saudis want to get on that train, or they're going to be left behind once that train takes off? And that is exactly the way I see it going. They want to get on that train before it's too late. This is why you see in Qatar. Qatar. I had a viewer spelled out for me. He said, this is how we pronounce it. Thank you. So Qatar, the country of Qatar, where they have the World Cup right now. So what Qatar ended up doing is they signed a 27-year deal with China. You see the trends where things are headed, and that Saudis do not want to be left behind.
When you take a look at current events, you look at 27 years, that's a long time. That's a big commitment.
Yeah, and that's why I remember talking about this one. Qatar decided to ignore the EU, the European Union, when they asked them, even though Qatar has a deal with Germany alone for 15 years. But the deal wasn't with the EU as a whole. It was only with one country.
Oh, how
So you
interesting.
can just see, it's a business decision, Ross. I mean, won't you do it if you are the head of a country, thinking about the welfare of your nation?
And you start adding these pieces up for patterns and trends. What does it say about the European Union when Germany has its own separate energy deal?
Yeah.
Just a data point to put in the system to be considering.
Well, this is why, and we're going to do a video about the visit of the president of the European Council to China. Why did he go to China but not the US? Once again, you see where the trends are headed. So this is what we wanted to share with you. Any final thoughts, Ross, before we sign off here?
I think we've done so much already.
Well, good. We hope you find this informative. And as always, prepare yourself for a changing world order. Till next time. Bye-bye.